Social influence affects everyone and all aspects of lives. I mean, consider your favorite musicians. It's quite likely that you started listening to them in your younger years because everyone around you was listening to them. The tendency to conform is strongest in our teens and is so powerfully captured in the movie This Is England. 12-year-old Shaun lives with his widowed mother in a small town in Britain. His dad was killed fighting in the Falklands War. Although a loner, things turn around for him when he meets Woody and his fun and friendly skinhead pack who take him under their wing. Shaun discovers parties, girls, snappy dressing, and finds some role models in Woody and the rest of the gang. But when an older skinhead, Combo, returns to the group after a prison sentence, many in the gang exit, opposed to Combo's overt racism and violent tendencies. But Shaun decides to stay in Combo's group and is quickly drawn into much more uncomfortable territory. We see in Shaun's move towards extremism what psychologists refer to as social influence. In this video, we look at how social influence works, why we are so tuned to it, how it impacts our decisions, and finally, how to avoid its pitfalls and use it to our advantage. If you like the video, remember to subscribe to the channel for more videos on human mind, brain, and behavior. Now let's get started. Social influence refers to the ways in which people change their own behaviors to meet the demands of their social environment. Now, social influence takes many forms. One of the most observed and understood one is conformism, which is the tendency of changing one's behavior to match the behaviors of others. The behaviors and judgments of other people provide information on the normal and expected behavior in a given situation, or what is typically approved or disapproved. Along with conformism, we'll also look at some of the other forms of social influence like social proof, norms, and groupthink in the following sections. An iconic series of experiments conducted in the 1950s by Solomon Asch laid the foundation of the psychological study of conformism. A typical experiment included a group of college students participating in a simple task, such as judging the length of lines. Each student viewed a card with a line on it, followed by another with 3 lines labeled A, B, and C. Now, one of these lines was the same as that on the first card, and the other 2 lines were clearly longer or shorter. Each participant was then asked to say aloud which line matched the length of that on the first card. In reality, though, the group only had one real participant and the rest were actors. Before the experiment, all actors were given detailed instructions on how they should respond in each round. They would always unanimously select the same line, but in some rounds they would give the correct response and in others an incorrect response. So they began with the obvious correct answer in initial rounds, so the real participant wasn't suspicious, but then gave a few wrong responses in the later rounds. The group was seated such that the real participants always responded last. The aim of the study was to test how many participants would change their answer to conform to those of the actors despite it being wrong. When there were no actors, participants responded correctly 99% of the time. That's how simple the task was. But with actors, the correct responses dropped by 36%. Overall, only 25% participants never conformed to the group. The remaining 75% gave the incorrect response to conform with the group at least once. Now, this finding is as robust as it gets in psychology and has been replicated multiple times in different contexts. To understand conformism better, let's start by looking at its cognitive causes, which are the psychological mechanisms which explain the tendency. Researchers postulate 3 underlying motivations for conformism. First is the goal of accuracy, wherein given incomplete information or ambiguous evaluation criteria while making a decision, we may rely on signals from others for a more accurate evaluation. A related heuristic is social proof, by which we infer the value or correctness of an action in a given situation by observing the degree to which others are performing it. So if you enter an elevator where everyone is facing the same but slightly odd way, say backwards, then you're likely to do the same without questioning the rationale behind such behavior. In such situations, we reason that if everyone else is doing it, it must be the correct way. Next is the goal of affiliation, wherein we conform to gain the approval of others and build more rewarding relationships with them. While much of our attempts to seek approval are deliberate and conscious, we often mimic behaviors completely unconsciously, like matching postures, facial expressions, vocal characteristics, or mannerisms. The third motivation is the goal of maintaining self-concept, wherein we conform to others' behaviors and beliefs in order to protect, enhance, and repair our own self-esteem. Social comparison theory suggests that individuals evaluate their own actions and abilities by comparing themselves to similar others, therefore aligning their behaviors closely to that of their reference groups. This view is also supported by the social identity theory, which claims that we derive a part of our self-esteem from the groups we belong to. So we follow group norms to reinforce our own identity and self-esteem. Next, some researchers argue that conformity is a cultural trait and that every culture cultivates a different degree and nature of conformism. This view categorizes cultures into either collectivists, which promote conformism as a desirable individual and social trait, or individualists, which are characterized by lower degree of conformism. Now, it must be noted that this theory has received its fair share of criticism for this binary categorization. And lastly, research has found that conformism peaks during mid-adolescence and then declines with age. Indeed, studies have shown that children in their preschool years already start adapting their public actions in alignment with their peers, while acting differently in private. Next, let's see what's happening in the brain when we conform to the behaviors of others. There is heavy brain machinery involved in processing social influence. Let's start with the most well-established finding. Social influence changes our perception of reward. Striatum, the reward center of the brain, shows increased activation when we conform to the behaviors of others. Next, there is strong evidence implicating the insular cortex and the anterior cingulate cortex in social influence. These two brain regions are involved in negative emotions and detection of conflicts or inconsistencies. Now, this suggests that conflicts between our own behaviors and that of others leads to negative emotions like anxiety, which drive us to conform. The involvement of amygdala also points to the role of craving social approval and consensus in driving conformity. Now, the orbitofrontal cortex is the brain region which integrates inputs from all these mentioned brain regions and informs decision making, and its activation is also associated with the act of conformity. Interestingly, some studies have shown that social influence can even distort our perceptions. Now, what that means is that in the Asch conformity experiment, some participants may have actually seen two lines of different lengths as having the same length based on the lies of the actors. Next, let's look at the benefits of conformism. After all, for us to have inherited this tendency from our ancestors, it must offer at least a few evolutionary advantages. Conformism and social influence in general allows individuals to take advantage of the information, intelligence, and experiences of others. This tendency would have been especially beneficial to early humans who lived in small groups where all group members would be exposed to the same problems, same alternatives, and same tools. An individual's hard-won information can benefit everyone who mimics them instead of everyone having to reinvent the wheel. I mean, literally, the use of wheel, fire, and tools could be adopted widely because humans copy each other well. This ability to gain meaningful information by observing the behaviors of others is known as social learning, and it is probably the defining characteristic of our species. Social learning is so hardwired in humans that within minutes of birth, infants start to mimic the observed facial expressions of adults. Another benefit of conformism is that it allows behaviors to spread locally, such that individuals can observe the benefits of synchronizing their behaviors. For example, if an individual tries to move a big rock, they may be unsuccessful alone, but if others copy this behavior, together they may be able to move the rock, thus discovering the benefits of cooperation. And lastly, conforming to group norms signals group membership, which allows individuals to enjoy the benefits that come with it, such as protection, support, social approval, and a sense of identity. Next, let's take a closer look at some of the undesirable impacts of conformism on our decisions. Firstly, social proof is a double-edged sword. It is easy for decision makers to use, but precisely because it's easy, it is overused and leads to bad decisions. This becomes even more problematic due to the fact that mostly we are not aware of the extent to which social influence impacts our decisions. Secondly, the tendency to conform is agnostic to the behavior that one conforms to, which means that undesirable behaviors can also spread widely due to conformism. Studies show that criminality, radicalism, ethnic violence, and copycat suicides spread from either person to person or as group norms. Next, groupthink occurs in group decision settings when people set aside their own beliefs or adopt the opinions of others in the group to conform to the perceived group consensus. If an open discussion and constructive criticism are not entertained before making a collective decision, the consequences can be quite disastrous, especially if the stakes are high, as is the case with policy decisions. United States' decision to invade Iraq without any evidence of weapons of mass destruction, or India's recent economic self-goal of demonetization are considered to be possible consequences of groupthink at the highest levels of government. Next, conformism at scale can often lead to idiosyncratic and fragile fads to emerge and collapse, some of which can have significant negative consequences. For example, markets often rise and fall based entirely on speculations and rumors blowing up. Similarly, early reporting of voting trends can impact elections, as people may change their votes based on the voting behavior of others. And finally, let's look at some strategies to avoid the undesirable impacts of conformism and use it to our advantage. Firstly, given incomplete information or ambiguous evaluation criteria for decision making, our reliance on social proof increases. Similarly, if it's a difficult task or the pressure to perform is high, we again lean more on the decisions and behaviors of others. Another factor that increases our reliance on conformism is the number of people performing the behavior. The larger the majority, the more we conform. Although if we perceive the majority to be mostly outside of our social group, we are less likely to conform. All of these are some of the situations where we must assess whether we are blindly relying on others' decisions and behaviors to our disadvantage. Next, in order to either promote conformity to desirable behaviors or prevent conformity to undesirable behaviors, it is crucial to identify individuals who have a disproportionately high influence on their social groups. For example, law enforcement agencies often concentrate their investigatory resources on some particular individuals who, once removed, lead to the highest aggregate reduction in crime. Next, conformism is heavily utilized in marketing. For example, one of the tactics is to offer free samples or initial discounts on new products and services to help get early adopters from whom the service or product can spread further through social influence. The same principle is used by adding laughter tracks to comedy content, as hearing others laugh can nudge an audience towards laughing. And finally, online spaces are highly social and are therefore fertile ground for social influence. As we are all very well aware, social cues like likes, comments, ratings and reviews influence all kinds of online behaviors significantly. A study on an online shopping platform found that the recommendations of other consumers influenced individual choices much more than the recommendations of an expert. And to conclude, let's look back at the story of Shaun. Shaun received social approval and a sense of identity from being part of the skinhead gang. He commits fully to this newfound identity, conforming to group norms such as hairstyles, clothes, music, and even political ideology. His behaviors gradually become more extreme and violent as he fails to question the actions of Combo and his gang and continues to conform blindly. Go watch the movie to find out if Shaun is able to break this pattern and get out of this world of hate and violence. And now, it's your turn. Tell us in the comments below how conformism has influenced your life and decisions. And do subscribe to the channel and like the video so that others can mimic your actions. See you next time.